Good evening, and welcome to Sports 101, the show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. Here at Sport 101, we look at the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective, also through the lens of history in the past, present, as well as in the making. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on social media on Twitter at Coach_Hart412 and on Facebook under the name Jamar Harp. Make sure you get social with SportsZone Chicago and the litany, Sports 101, and the litany of other SportsZone Chicago shows by following SportsZone Chicago on social media as well. SportsZone Chicago can be found on Twitter at SportsZoneCHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is the world's only Black-owned sports talk app. You can watch and listen to my show as well as the many others. And if you miss something, don't worry about it. Go to the search the YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago. But more importantly, we need everyone to download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found in the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. This week, we would like to talk about, and I will show you right here. Our title this week is called Sneakerheads, Athleisure and Retail in the Black Community. So we're going to watch a quick video to start us off, and that's going to be our introduction to this week's subject matter. And I'll start this video, and we'll move on from there.
These are like my children.
Ty Wallen says he wears every last one of his 300 pairs of children, though you might just call them sneakers. Since the 22-year-old Brooklyn college student began collecting vintage and new basketball shoes 10 years ago, he estimates he spent close to $50,000 on them, from $25 to $1,500 a pair.
I'm into them because of the style, how they look, how they feel. I get stopped all the time about the different sneakers I wear. I won't get rid of any of them unless I really have to.
When he buys sneakers secondhand, Wallen keeps the original box to preserve their history.
Out of all of these shoes, how many would you say you actually wear?
10, 15 pairs.
10, 15 pairs out of more than 100 pairs of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Wallen, 21-year-old Chris Vasquez, who's also from Brooklyn, keeps most of his more modest 100-pair sneaker collection stored away in his closet.
I mean, if you just look at the way these sneakers look and the box that they came in, this is more than a shoe, it's art. So I think if you wore them, you kind of destroy that. I mean, you wouldn't wear a painting, would you?
No.
Yeah.
If both Vasquez and Wallen, who consider themselves sneakerheads, needed any validation their collections are art, they need to look no further than this exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. The story begins in the mid-1800s, when the tire company Goodyear invented the vulcanized rubber sole.
The fact that we are in an exhibit dedicated to sneaker culture, what does that say about the industry and where it's headed?
I mean, it's a double-edged sword.
Gian De Leon is the deputy style editor at Complex Magazine, which covers urban fashion and hip-hop culture.
This culture that was once for a certain group of insiders who were super passionate about it has become mainstream.
In 1917, Converse introduced the first canvas-top sneakers made just for basketball. The All-Star was later named after athlete Chuck Taylor. Fast forward to the 1980s, sneaker companies saw an emerging market in Black and urban communities.
Sneaker culture, hip-hop culture, streetwear, they're all part of this community that stems from, hip-hop in the 80s. There was a distinct mode of dress that, for a lot of minorities, these were our status symbols.
Is it the shoes?
Nothing brought more status than owning a pair of J's, or Air Jordans, created by Nike in the basketball icon's rookie season. De Leon believes this is when sneakerhead culture was born.
It's like advertising was made to make us want these as luxurious items that represented, okay, I have enough to spend $200 on a shoe. My house may not be as big as I want it to be, but I got them J's though.
Sneaker sales in the U.S. today are $34 billion a year. Dozens of blogs and forums announce sneaker release dates and where to snag a coveted pair. De Leon points to high-end sneakers on display at the museum by designers such as Christian Louboutin, Jimmy Choo, and even Chanel. This 2009 collaboration sneaker between Louis Vuitton and Kanye West retailed for $960. This eBay seller is asking for $3,400 for her pair.
It's a great feeling, but it's never over.
Ty Wallen says he cares less about brand name recognition or price tags. Sneakers simply make him happy. He knows many people may not understand his pricey hobby, but he'll keep collecting sneakers for years to come, keeping a running wish list on his smartphone.
Any shoe that I bought, I don't regret. You can be anybody you want to be through a pair of sneakers.
Again, so you see the topic of tonight's episode, which is sneakerheads, athleisure, and retail in the Black community. Obviously, from that video, we see sneakerheads, or people that just love collecting and or selling, trading, doing things in the sneaker industry. Athleisure refers to, again, from the video, taking something that was known as a basketball sneaker and other things and incorporating it into modern dress. And then we'll go over the business part later. So this picture right here, this is Mr. Earl West, and this is one of the pictures in his room in suburban Atlanta, where instead of a room, it really looks like a warehouse. Inside his house are nearly 900 pairs of sneakers valued in West's estimation at more than $100,000. Yes, more than $100,000. West stated that if you could solely support Black-owned retail stores, if he had the option, but that's not the case. Again, a lot of times these individuals are buying these high-priced sneakers, and they started the culture, but yet they're not circulating that money within the community, as a lot of these dealers at these conventions and other places they go, the Black or African American has been locked out of this business. West, again, is a self-described sneakerhead who is a manager at a data center, and he started collecting shoes in 1982. West, again, is so ingrained in the sneakerhead culture that he once spent 4 days outside of a Whitner's social status to be, and we'll talk about Mr. Whitner later as well, too, to purchase a pair of Air Max 97s, a 2018 collaboration with esteemed shoe designer Sean Witherspoon that was made partially of corduroy. Pairs of that shoe can sell online today for as much as $2,000, even though they retailed for $160. West again said he spent more than about $30,000 on shoes that are now worth more 3 times than that, because some of them increased in value over time. Now here's some more pictures of Mr. West and his collection. Here's a shoe right here from his collection as well. And then we have another room in his house again, where he keeps over almost $100,000 worth in shoes. However, again, with the people that are in this culture, the sneakerheads, it's been messed up. There aren't nearly enough Black stores to spend these Black dollars on. If you're going to spend $100,000, obviously you want to keep that within your own community. West is one of the thousands of people in America, and particularly Black males, who are fixated on sneakers, that they drive in the sneaker market in the United States that pulled in $70 billion last year in 2020, according to research company Statista. At the same time, again, that's that harsh reality that while Black culture has made the sneaker culture, and it was a valuable element to introducing this culture to any wardrobe, Black consumers are not the heart of the financial tide, and Black retailers are most coveted item to find to purchase these shoes. So again, all these sneakerheads are giving these $50,000, $30,000, however much you spend a year on sneakers, is going into another community, because even though the trend is based off of Black urban culture, we're not proprietors in this space, so we have to give the money to someone else. Nike recently did a sustainability report in March that opened it with a word from its president and chief executive officer, John Donohue. Mr. Donohue said it would not be, the culture would not be what it is today without the contributions of Black athletes and Black culture. And again, some retailers are working on changing the disparity. However, those contributions generate little in the way of Black wealth. Because again, when you look at economics, it's all about trying to keep things within your community. So we'll show a quick video right here in regards to branding and imaging and how Nike started with their very first commercial, and then we'll pivot and see how Nike pivoted as well and how they went to a different perception. So let's watch their first ever ad, Nike's first ever ad. Then we'll unpack that, and then we'll see what they morphed into.
From day one, runners have taken their sport rather seriously. Once things got a little better organized, people started taking notes, analyzing how they ran and how they could run even faster. Today at Nike, we know even more. We developed one of the most sophisticated sport research labs in the world to let us see, in detail, the peculiarities of style, the dynamics of foot strike. And at Nike, we're putting that knowledge to work, making shoes that actually help athletes to run faster and safer. Why do we go to so much trouble? Well, it may be the 20th century and all that, but there are still people out there who run as if their life depended on it.
Now you see in that first commercial Nike ever did, they did a lot of talking about the shoe, the intricate details of the shoe. And when you use that as a strategy in marketing, you're always going to be behind the eight ball, because when someone comes out with a new innovation, and you have to come out with a new innovation. So you get sort of like the cola wars or restaurant fast food wars and things like that, where you're competing against another large entity. Nike saw this and then changed their strategy. And I'd like to show you one of their original Jordan videos, and we can discuss that.
Man was not meant to fly.
Air Jordan, basketball by...
Okay, so in the second video, it was just someone jumping, and you heard Michael Jordan's voice stating that who said men couldn't fly. There was no focus on the actual shoe. They showed a logo and focused on the brand. And that's what became Nike, made them such a global force, as they became a brand or a lifestyle brand, meaning if you want to do this, you need this. It was a part of a culture, a status in regards to culture. If I'm going to be an athlete, I have to do something involved with Nike. And they were able to place themselves in that category by focusing on not the specific shoe, but using celebrities to enhance their brand and using their status to project the image of that the shoe is helping them do that. And they were one of the first companies to do that. So again, you see the difference between the first video Nike put out, where they were stating this shoe is going to help you run faster and all the physical attributes about the product, versus becoming a brand. And that's what we want to focus on. Again, that second attempt showed Nike pivoting to brand marketing around a player, and they didn't even show the player. So sneakers can also be about style, history, and even community. There was a new study done that reveals Sneakerheads, that sneakers are important facets of their identities. And this is particularly for African-American men who grew up in the 1970s and 80s, coveting sneakers popularized by hip hop stars and basketball legends. So this was the beginning of marketing for shoe products in the modern era. So a lot of these kids growing up in the 70s and 80s that may have not could afford the shoes then, or rebuying these shoes now at double and triple the value to reconnect themselves with a part of their childhood and various other different reasons. But it just goes to show that that's where this culture has come from. In the journal Fashion and Textiles, researchers report new insight into the motivations, brand preferences, and identity considerations of all sneakerheads. The findings were drawn from interviews from 12 men in the mid Atlantic region of the United States, many of whom were African American, and all whom self identified as sneakerheads. The findings help inform marketing efforts and help fill a void in academic literature on the topic and this subculture of people. A researcher who looks at consumer behavior and trends that apply to this industry in fashion and apparel. Any sort of trend that's out that's getting a lot of attention, of course, researchers will be drawn to. And this was said by the study's leader, Delissa Matthews. Ms. Matthews is an assistant professor of textile brand management and marketing at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the Wilson College of Textiles. Basically, what the doc wants to find out, she wants to know why behind the trend. Like, why did this sneakerhead trend start? What's the motivating factor for people to go after this particular trend? And there's such things they have to do. Again, they're paying triple the times of when a shoe was originally released due to enhance this culture. Nike only makes a limited amount of shoes, so people will camp out in front of stores, grown men for a week just to buy a shoe. And what drives the quote unquote individual brand preference? After researching the culture, sneakerhead subculture was defined to have a strong interest in sneaker history, to seek out rare and exclusive sneaker collections, and to admire, collect, and sometimes resell the sneakers. So again, there's so many different things that go on this market. You have people that just like the evolution of sneakers and or tennis shoes, where what we say in Pittsburgh, and they collect them and don't wear them. And then you have rare collectors that may wear and collect them. And then you have people that resell and refurbish old shoes and resell them and wear. There's a great market for that online, where you can buy used shoes and they get refurbished. Based on all these interviews, three things emerged about the motivations and preferences of sneakerheads. The first thing was what the researchers called back in the day. And that thing referenced the importance of history to sneakerheads, the nostalgia when things came out, and just restoring that in their lives as things change. Dr. Matthews says sneakerheads trace the origins of the movement to the 70s and 80s, where sneakers were popularized by basketball icon Michael Jordan and also hip hop stars who were known not to have just unique rhythms and lyrics, but also their style of dress. So we look at this picture right here of Run DMC in Hollis, Queens. You can see they're dressed in, again, Adidas. And that was the first group that actually took a label and were able to be marketed by them, not only in shoe apparel, but their entire wardrobe, as they often wore Adidas jumpsuits and the hats that they made famous. The second theme, all about the Jumpman, references the importance of brand Jordan and the release of Nike Air Jordan, the ones in 1985. To many, that was the start of a revolution, as the Jordan brand has released the same shoe over and over again in different varieties, and have had so many people knock it off, where you can go around and see a lot of people wearing Jordans every day in today's culture with the kids. A lot of times that's all they prefer to wear as a status symbol in their individual teenage cultures. Again, Jordans are resold, refurbished, and are a prize for any sneakerhead. Well, Michael Jordan came out with his shoes because he was such a great pivotal figure, and his performance was like no other. People wanted to be like Mike and wanted to wear his shoes. So again, when we referenced the video, we said Michael Jordan says specifically, do you want to fly? Meaning that these shoes can really help you. That was a great implication. And Nike and then so many other people after that began using this marketing strategy. What is a notoriety, and again, what he stood for in the African American community, people just wanted to have these shoes to emulate what he stood for as a performance. And we all know back in the 90s, there was a trend, especially in larger cities, Pittsburgh, Chicago, etc., in the Northeast and Midwest, where a lot of young men were dying over these shoes, getting robbed. That was a common situation. So there was a lot of backlash over these shoes before they became, quote unquote, in the sneakerhead culture. The last thing that we like to talk about, what Matthew said was the most surprising, was called for members only. And that's a common trend among the study participants, meaning they feel a sense of community and exclusivity in regard to the sneakerhead subculture. While many sneakerheads say they feel connected to other sneakerheads who understand and respect the history and culture of sneakers, they also express the us versus them attitude toward others they call hype beats. The definition of a hype beat as a person who hop on the sneaker trends or just interested in the resale value of the shoes, meaning a business person. They don't really love sneakers. The researchers also found that many sneakerheads, sneakers are important for their social identities, which is their concept of self-being and self-esteem to the groups that they belong in. So instead of using their athletic prowess or things like that to differentiate themselves, they use their sneakers and their knowledge of sneakers to establish themselves in their individual communities. Sneakerheads also share norms and practices and even have a vocabulary or a lingo. They use terms such as drops, which references the release date for certain shoes, and colorway is another important term, which is the particular color scheme the shoe might come in. Again, a lot of these shoes are re-released with different colorways. As a collegiate coach, many of my colleagues as well, including myself, are part of the athleisure culture that started, where professionals now wear sneakers with suits, dress clothes, and many other non-traditional outfits. So right here, you can see Steph Curry coming into a game this week, and you see he has on a suit and some tennis shoes or sneakers. One participant in the study stated that when he goes to an event, he makes sure he doesn't make eye contact first. He makes shoe contact, meaning as a sneakerhead, he's always looking to see what someone has on so he can talk about that culture and give them tips on what they should do. This sneakerhead stated he's looking to see what kind of shoes you have and how you're matching it with what you have on. Dr. Matthews also stated that findings are important because they can help brands better understand and serve their individual consumers or different consumer networks that are segmented through race, culture, and sometimes religion. They also can help eliminate misconceptions about sneakerheads. Sometimes when we see trends, people make this huge assumption that these are people who can't control their spending habits or they're being wasteful. However, this is something that they save up money for, and this is a part of their culture, and they're using this either to resell later or just put on a shelf and never wear again. Digging deeper, it also has to again do with identity and nostalgia, bringing back feelings of yesteryear. It can be the voice of the consumer and really advocate for them. And again, this research helped understand their motivations, get it past assumptions that people will make. Well, you're immature, you have a six-figure job, and you spend all your money buying sneakers, things like that. So again, this is what this research is getting to help people understand this culture. So right now, we're going to take a quick break. Thank you for joining in. I'm Jamar Harp, and this is Sports 101. And when we come back, we'll get to more of the economics of the sneakerhead culture. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us. This is Jamar Harp in this week's episode of Sport 101.
Please stop and listen because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you You may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
Welcome back. Again, I'm Jamar Harp, and you're watching this week's episode of Sports 101, the show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. At Sport 101, we like to talk about the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective using the lens of history, looking at things in the past, present, as well as in the making. Again, make sure you get social with Sports 101 and the litany of other SportsZone Chicago shows by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. SportsZone Chicago can be found on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found in the the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Again, back to this week's episode, we'll talk about sneakerheads, and we talked about, again, some of the consumer trends before break. Now we'd like to discuss the economics of sneakerheads in the Black community. So before break, we discussed the billions of dollars generated Black community to buy and purchase in the sneakerhead culture. Again, 70 billion was spent last year. Now, all that wasn't by African-American males, but a good percentage of it was. Now, Black culture has made sneakers an invaluable element to any wardrobe, hence the term athleisure, where you see people wearing sneakers or tennis shoes with dress clothes and suits and outfits that they normally wouldn't have worn in the past. Black consumers are at the heart of this financial tide as well as trend. However, Black retailers are very coveted items to find in this sneakerhead subculture. Any sort of cultural force is always absent of any power, and it's done often in a misleading way to suggest that Black people have an economic strength that doesn't actually exist. And this was stated by Jared Bell. Dr. Bell is a pop culture authority, and he's a professor of African diaspora studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. He also stated, and just unpacking that statement, he was saying that this is a consumer-based economy, but however, even though it's a consumer-based economy, it does not mean that the consumers actually have power, because if they had the power, they could segment this trend in their own community and reap the benefits of the $70 billion shoe culture. However, many in the industry, for retail store owners, consumers, franchisees, and executives have expressed concern that only 5% of sneaker retailers in the United States of America are of African American descent. James Whitner stated that the sneaker culture in regards to ownership and retail is a white boys club like most things. And Whitner is a man who carved out a successful niche with boutique apparel and sneaker stores in several cities. Mr. Whitner also stated that there are people aware of it, but their privilege doesn't force them to have to change. So similar to the legal cannabis industry, where when it was illegal, it's still illegal in some states, but the states that have become medicinal, oftentimes it was people of color, Hispanic and African American, that were selling it illegally in the street. But now, due to the barriers enacted, they cannot become legal sellers. So we have long time consumers that are restricted again in this culture in selling, resale, as well as the restoration of products in the sneakerhead culture. So we're going to show you a picture right now of Mr. Whitner. This is one of his boutiques that he owned. James Whitner's business have evolved from apparel and sneaker shops in Charlotte, North Carolina, to several boutiques throughout the East Coast for his company, the Whitner Group. Mr. Whitner has been so successful that Vice President Kamala Harris, when she was on campaign tour, visited his store last year. And here's a pic of Vice President Harris in the Mr. Whitner store. Mr. Whitner also collaborated with Nike to create a sneaker, the Maria Air Jordan 3, named for his shop in Atlanta. Whitner is an anomaly, however, in the industry, even with help from his community. Mr. Whitner stated that his saving grace was he had a good ecosystem of a few black people who taught him the ropes. But on the other side, there were so many more white gatekeepers who were keeping him and other potential people that wanted to get into the economic side of the sneaker culture out. Changing it as an individual choice to many, Mr. Whitner said, especially for white Americans, because they're part of a system that has been created to keep black people out of so many different enterprises within America. So oftentimes people will create their own. So there's no identifiable data that tracks the number of black-owned independent sneaker retail stores. But Whitner, who's been in the game for a long time, knows all of them and has counted 18, with 3 being in Europe. Mr. Whitner maintained his first store for about 5 years, but he made a change in 2011 and took his business into the stratosphere. His first store was called the Flavor Factory in Charlotte. However, he changed the name because it was very urban, so he changed it to social status, invoking references that these shoes provide an element of social status to men, sort of like the bag game for women or the shoe game, the red bottom shoes. What has to happen in public, or heels. So what has to happen, Mr. Whitner and some of the others said, in public policy, which is developed by law through mandates, that the wealth being created by all this consumption and exchange of sneakers, that $70 billion that we reference, has to be redistributed back to the people doing the consuming. So the people that are doing consuming, who are mainly black men, want a part of this business in a nutshell. And again, that's not telling black people to start a sneaker distribution program or a sneaker company, because there's no catching up to Adidas, Nike, even Under Armour, some of these larger apparel manufacturers. So the only thing that can be done is consumers having not only the right to withhold their money, but the right to have what they call as consumer benefit. And it's not easily done, but I think that that's the only real solution. And Mr. Whitner, again, says the same thing. So basically what he's advocating is let's pull back from this $70 billion and hurt the culture until some point they open up entries of barrier for black men so they can get on the retail side and redistribute this wealth back in the community. Now that would probably be hard because, sneakerheads, they want the latest, and if it's going to come out on this date, they'll camp out in their car, etc., to wait for it. So it's basically a situation whereas The Montgomery bus boycott, you have to make a decision. Do you want to do something for the greater good, or are you going to focus on your individual needs as a sneakerhead? The next individual I like to talk about is Issam Loman, who was a black man, and he's owned 22 Athletics foot stores in the past, but has since bought and sold several of them, bringing his total ownership total to 9. Mr. Loman said you can count on us on one hand uh, how many black men are in the sneaker industry. Again, he stated the fact that considering black men are the main consumers of sneakers, that the ones who built this industry, there should be more people on the economic side. The barrier to entering the retail market is high for prospective store owners of any nationality, but it's in particularly for black men between corporate control over which stores can sell this particular brand sneakers. Nike has moved to a different model since they have their own Nike stores. It's hard to get Nike to get individual contracts now that they used to do in the past to certain stores. So often stores won't have Nikes, and if they do, they were bought at an exorbitant price and being resold even higher. These stores can require startup costs that begin around $60,000, and then there may be some licensing fees and to sell in particular shoes. Hip hop, broadly speaking, and we're talking about it as the fashion side of hip hop, in and of itself relates in general to Afro Americans' overall influence on American culture and popular culture, as hip hop, R&B, rap has influenced American culture. Many people have pointed out that there would be no American pop culture without black people in R&B and the rap culture. So the African American influence ignited again this current sneaker phenomenon, which erupted when Michael and Jordan emerged as a global sensation and ambassador for Nike footwear in the early 1980s. Between Nike's creative marketing and Jordan's soaring popularity due to his exploits on the basketball court, Air Jordan sneakers became a must-have for young people everywhere. And again, this was a status symbol. I remember in high school, it was individuals that used to miss school or come late so they could come to school with a new pair of Jordans that were released that morning. Mr. Loman, who is 45, said it bothers him that an industry driven by black dollars and black culture is not inclusive to black business. Mr. Loman got started when he was 22 in 1998. He had just graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, was scrambling for resources to secure his first store. Mr. Loman used some leftover scholarship money he had and a refund check his senior year, a loan from his parents who secured a loan, took out a second mortgage on their home, and he had earnings from investing in Yahoo, which was a startup company at the time, and another small business loan to purchase his first store. Mr. Loman said it wasn't easy, but he had a lot of support and was able to pay back his parents with their original loan, as well as buy other stores. Mr. Loman was very grateful. The Athlete's Foot had a relationship with a bank that was financing franchisees because we know how much racism there is in the banking industry, in particular for large business loans. So he was able to find the right bank that would franchise him as a franchisee of Athlete's Foot. Mr. Loman said acquiring a retail space was also difficult. However, it's more difficult now for African Americans than it was 2 decades ago. You have the influx of social media, online sales, and then again, certain manufacturers are deciding not to lease to individual resellers. They can just sell it in their Nike store or their Nike outlet, or have a pop-up shop in different hubs throughout the United States. This is why many choose the online model, which you can sell, resell, and also refurbish shoes. Nike is now a behemoth athletic brand, and they play a huge role because of its universal popularity, Mr. Loman said. Nike can alone determine the store's profitability and existence. So, for example, if Nike gives you a contract to sell in your individual store, you can be successful. But if not, you may be stuck to only New Balances, and you have to move into quote unquote running store, and that pigeonholes you to a certain demographic. It also became more selective, and we're talking about Nike, of which stores sell its products, often focusing again on its own retail stores. On top of that, Nike is producing fewer shoes than they did in the 80s in recent years to drive this demand and encourage this sneakerhead culture. Because if they're producing fewer when they come out, just like when the PlayStation or other things that come out that are must haves, and particularly during the Christmas season, people will get up early and wait in line for it. Mr. Loman said back in the day, if you had a Nike account, you could open up a store pretty much anywhere. But again, nowadays, to the barriers that we stated above, Nike isn't keen to give out accounts anymore. This next individual I like to talk about in the culture is Darius Billings. Mr. Billings has worked in the athletic apparel sneaker industry since graduating from Howard University, which is located in Washington, D.C., in 1988. He currently is a senior director of product and marketing for Athlete's Foot. Mr. Billings said he was inspired by a convention with a group of family and friends during the Black Lives Matter social movement protests recently to consider how his company could be a factor in bridging racial inequities in the economics of buying and selling sneakers. This past spring, he launched the Strategic African American Retail Track, or STAART. START, which is the acronym used, is designed to address Loman's and witness points about helping create entries of barrier and pathways for Black entrepreneurs to become retail store owners. The program is all about fostering change within an industry that was really built on Black culture, Black influence, and a Black community, Billings stated. START recruits, encourages, and supports Black entrepreneurs in the sneaker industry by providing education on how to start up stores, how to sell, how to talk to manufacturers to get rates. They expose and help them clear traditional barriers that we stated above for African American, mainly men, that they often face in this industry. Jennifer Ford stated that she wished START was around when she got into the business. Ms. Ford is the owner of a sneaker boutique, Premium Goods, in the Rice Village section of Houston, Texas. So here's a picture of Miss Ford right here. And 17 years ago, she became the only Black female proprietor of a sneaker store in the United States that sold all major brands like Nike, Jordan brand, Adidas, and New Balance. So what a lot of people don't realize, as a store, you can be licensed to sell Nike, but not Jordan brand. Miss Ford stated that a friend in the business encouraged her, who was a buyer. Miss Ford used to be a buyer for department stores in New York at the time, the major ones like Lazarus, Kaufman's, things like that. And her friend encouraged her to join in, and she used every penny that she had to create her sneaker store. It would have been amazing to have someone tell me to watch this and don't do this. Miss Ford said, and she also stated she wants everyone to make sure you get a really good accountant. Try to do things on your own in regards to the startup costs and things that you're buying and the upsell price. You really want a good accountant to manage these things. Also, Ms. Ford stated she would have had more confidence to expand and have other stores, but it was very hard as she didn't want to potentially risk losing everything she had built to get another store. So by placing all her funds in one store and not having a START program like that, she didn't have any business ears to bounce things off of or to help her get another store in a different location in her city or nationwide. Ms. Ford says she's working with business partners like Nike and other industry giants, including loan giants such as Bank of America, and they're strategically working on summits, building classes, and anything that they do to help bring Black people along to really help them close the gap of ownership in this industry. we don't break the system by just saying that the system is against us. Ford and a lot of other entrepreneurs stated in the sneaker culture. We break the system by succeeding in the system, then letting the system know what's wrong with it. So by getting more and more black entrepreneurs, male or female, into the sneakerhead subculture as owners of online now, I think that's the future because brick and mortar stores are falling off. Then they can demand some type of change. In closing, I want to address a few factors. So the sneakerhead culture, just as like any other things in the United States, rock and roll, um, we talked about soccer a lot on the show. Any inventions by people of African descent that go to another culture. What eventually you have to learn is by taking ownership and pride in one's culture and exhibiting that, you cannot let others take advantage of it. So if I went to, let's say I wanted to go out for hibachi, and I went there and there wasn't a Japanese man behind that, a lot of people would complain and say they didn't have the authentic experience because it wasn't a true Japanese hibachi chef. So they always make sure they have hibachi chefs because they own that part of their culture. So by owning different parts of all culture, taking pride and keeping it within the community as much as we can, I think you can have a greater deal of ownership on the macro level. Taking example, SportsZone Chicago. Um, Obviously, ESPN is the main. Fox Sports is another main giant in the sports talk industry. However, Sean Sierra and Maya Kai decided they wanted to do something for their segment. So they started Sports Zone Chicago about 7 years ago, and it's growing every day. But they didn't complain. They wanted to talk about certain segments in sport that relate to culture and history, not only of African American people, but people of color everywhere. So instead of begging ESPN, Sean Sierra and Maya Kai developed this themselves. So if we took the Sports Zone Chicago creators approach, then we will be much better throughout society, and we won't have to go back and forth with the quote unquote majority population begging for things. Having a more entrepreneurial spirit, uh, uh, what is the word I'm looking for? Umoja, cooperative economics, practicing these things will help us in the culture in so many ways. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Sports 101. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Coach_Harp412 and Facebook under Jamar Harp. Please make sure you get social with Sports 101 and a litany of other shows in Sports Zone Chicago by following Sports Zone Chicago on social media. Sports Zone Chicago can be found on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at Sports Zone Chicago, and Instagram at Sports Zone Chicago. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, search Sports Zone Chicago, but more importantly, everyone, please download the Sports Zone Chicago app. The Sports Zone Chicago app can be found on the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Again, thank you for tuning in to another weekly episode of Sports 101. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. We'll see you next week on our normally scheduled time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. And I'm gone.